We've got an incredible panel today consisting of Gerald Charles, and we've got hello, Gerald. Good to see you, mate. We've got joining Gerald. We've got Alessandro Morico, and we've got Michael Sachar, and a little bit about each one of them. We've got Gerald, who is the partner and co-founder of Rock and Roller Coffee, based here in Cape Town. Gerald is commonly referred to as the doctor of roasting and coffee all across Africa. He's an award-winning roaster, previously a barista, and has trained multiple award-winning baristas in Africa that have gone on to win at the World Championships. So he certainly knows his stuff, and he certainly knows how to pour a great coffee. I can attest to that. Many great coffees. Second today on the panel is Alessandro Morico. He's the CEO of Morico Import and Export. They are specialist coffee equipment importers and distributors. They're also a consulting company here in Africa. They consult to many of the great coffee franchises across the nation. And certainly Alessandro is in terms of his knowledge of coffee all the way through the supply chain, it is second to none. I had the amazing opportunity to have a lunch with Alessandro and talk about coffee for a couple hours. And it was incredible. I didn't think coffee could be so interesting, but it certainly was. And we hope to impart a bunch of that knowledge into today's webinar and share that information. Next up, and last but not least, is Michael Sachar. He is our third panelist on today. And Michael is the CEO of M2 Bio Food and Beverage. Michael has been trading in coffee, raw coffee, roasted coffee for about 20 years plus. Certainly knows the ins and outs of coffee worldwide, also throughout the entire supply chain. He is always looking to find that perfect cup. I think Michael can almost compete with me in the amount of coffees I drink daily. I'm not sure if it's the healthiest, but I probably have a good 15 shots a day. So Alessandro, I think, is going to tell you he beats me on that. We'll soon see. So thank you, you guys, for joining the webinar today. And I'm gonna hand the reins over to Michael, who's going to start a presentation. And he's going to give you a little bit of a background on coffee, the history, where we are and where we're going. Michael, it's all yours.
Thanks, Jeff. I've actually been very fortunate to be surrounded by great coffee my entire life. I remember my mom actually introduced me to amazing filter coffee in my teenage years and at university. And we used to drink it through a single cup filter. And I got interested in the different types of coffee and the different ways coffee could be consumed. So that certainly got my passion initiated in terms of my love for coffee. But if we take it back a few years, let's go to the 8th century. The most popular story in terms of where coffee came from is a goat herder called Kaldi. He was in Ethiopia and he noticed one night that his goats were going absolutely crazy. He couldn't control them. And he looked, they were eating berries from a particular tree. And he looked at these and he thought, wow, they've got so much energy, I can't control them. He took some of the berries back to the monastery. They boiled some up in a cup, and it gave him and the other monks amazing energy that they could stay awake during the evening prayers, and gave them a boost of energy and this euphoria. And that's how coffee really started. From there, it stayed in the same region, but managed to cross the Red Sea into Yemen. And the port that it landed at was actually called Mocha. And we've kept that name, Mocha, as a term of endearment for coffee as the years have gone on. Soon word spread about this amazing drink, spread to Egypt, Persia, Turkey. Little coffee shops started to pop up, and they were actually called schools of the wise, because people would talk about things happening in their lives, and it would be a hub of activity. There was actually an Indian Sufi called Baba Budan, who was traveling to Mecca for his pilgrimage in 1670, and he managed to take some of the coffee berries back with him to India, and they planted there. And obviously the climate and the soil and everything was great in India, And those farms that started growing back then are still producing coffee today. So it's actually amazing that way back then, almost 400 years ago, that it's still producing from the same farms. Then slowly it started to get into Europe, Italy, England, Austria, France, Germany, and Holland. Little coffee sort of meeting areas, shops started to pop up. People were consuming coffee. And we actually have the French to thank for taking it across the Atlantic. They took it to Martinique, one of their territories. And because the climate is so good in the Caribbean, it started to grow abundantly there. And then slowly moved to North America, Central America, and South America. And coffee started to grow and eventually spread all over the world. By the 19th century, it was a global phenomenon. It was being shipped and consumed absolutely everywhere. And if you look where it's taken us today, the coffee industry today is worth $465 billion US, which is a huge number. And if you think about that in day-to-day terms, it's 2.25 billion cups per day. And we can see it's not going to decrease anytime soon. In the next 5 or 6 years, it's going to go up to $668 billion US. This is a huge amount, and people are going to continue drinking, and it's just going to increase exponentially. If we look at the coffee production by country, Brazil is by far the biggest with 37%, followed by Vietnam, and then Colombia. And you can see all these countries are in and around the equator and between the Tropic of Capricorn and the Tropic of Cancer. And that's the perfect area where the climate is correct and the soil is perfect for growing and getting a good yield out of the coffee. If we look at the consumption, the US is still far ahead. 971,000 tons, which is 971 million kilos of coffee, which is a huge amount. And interesting thing is in second here is Brazil. So they're the biggest producer, but a lot of that coffee stays within Brazil because they actually consume it themselves. And followed by Germany, Italy, and France, 3 big European consumers, which takes us on to the next slide. If you look at the per person consumption, it's all cooler countries, Finland, Norway, Denmark, Iceland, and Finland. If you look at 12 kilos per person per year, it works out to a kilo per person per month on average, which is very, very interesting. And all these countries in the top 8 are all in Europe with the colder climate. But that's enough of a history lesson for me. I'd like to hand over to Alessandro now. He's going to talk a little bit about the coffee cherry and the different types of specialty coffee that exist today.
Mark, thanks. And thanks for the refresher. I often forget about the history and the dates. And these are opportunities that also give me an idea of the history that a lot of us often fail to pay attention to, because a lot of the times we wonder why certain countries use so much coffee and certain countries don't. And you have to go back hundreds of years to find it. And just before I go into the cherries, it was interesting that you mentioned the 19th century. You know, there's probably 2 stages in history where some of the coffee was probably best accepted. One of them would probably be the example of the Boston Tea Party. And is why people say why America consumes so much coffee today. It's because back in the 1700s, when they threw all the tea in the ocean, they decided to rebel against the tea drinking English, and they started to drink coffee. So that was one of those. And then, of course, in the 17th century, in the 1600s, when Pope Clement decided that the devil's drink was, after all, not the devil's drink, and blessed it. And before you knew it, there were cafes opening up in Rome in the 1640s and the 1650s. So it's interesting how you look at the States today and the consumption of coffee, and Italy and Europe and the consumption of coffee today, and you think, why are all these Italians drinking so much coffee? And you go back years. So thanks for that. Always very interesting. But it does bring us to understanding coffee a little bit better. And I see on this slide that we're talking about coffee cherries, but another point I want to bring up was, for example, the consumption of coffee and the production of coffee. We're looking at Brazil and Vietnam. And although Vietnam is second in the list, it's to be noted for some of the coffee drinkers out there that Vietnam is a majority Robusta producing country. So when we go into the discussions of specialty coffee, a lot of that Vietnam production is excluded from the specialty coffee because it's not an Arabica grade, an Arabica varietal bean. And because it's not an Arabica varietal bean, you will find that the Brazil production of coffee drives the markets more than most, because we are a majority Arabica drinking world. And hence the Vietnam crops or harvest or damage or whatever rains and floods happen in Vietnam won't affect it. And of course, it affects the trade, and it affects the values, which is a London stock exchange, while I believe Arabica is New York. Sometimes I get them the wrong way around. So anyway, so going into the coffee cherries, we're talking about processing mostly Arabica coffees. And we're talking about cherries that, if you look at the slide, it's a beautiful red cherry. The green one is not ripe. So that's a cherry that would probably be picked out by the coffee pickers. Coffee cherries are grown on a plant. I think you get 50 bags a year out of a hectare, something along those lines. 10 bags of 60 kilos each, 600 kilos a hectare. So you need a lot of land to grow coffee. With this in mind, the coffee farmers, the coffee producers of today are taking more and more care to produce their coffee so that they get a higher price at the markets. The coffee cherry, as you see it in that picture, is a beautiful coffee cherry. They don't all look like that. You can imagine looking at grapes used for wines. Sometimes the grape looks old and dried up, and sometimes it's the best grapes that you can get to make the best wine. Although that's kind of where we are. A coffee cherry, we then crush it or pulp it or process it, as we may go later on in the slides. And once we process it, we get the green coffee bean. Now, the green coffee bean is processed in so many different ways. And the green coffee bean eventually reaches Dr. G. Not all the beans of the world, just some of them reach Dr. G. And then he roasts them for us and roast them in different grades of roast profiles. If you look at the three images, you have one red cherry, one green bean, and one roasted bean. If we were to even touch on the pyramid of different methods of cherries, beans, transport methods, process methods, roasting methods, we would come out with millions and millions of different flavor profiles. They start from the soil. The soil, how does it grow the bean? Is it grown under a palm tree that grows bananas? Does that mean that we've got a lot of sweetness in the earth? Does that sweetness get processed into the growing of the plant? Does that cherry absorb some of the sweetness? And once we pick that cherry off for the plant, how do we process it? So the processing method can be a fully washed process, where we wash all the skin off the bean and we ferment the bean for a period of time, until such time as the bean is so clean from all the external impurities that once individual special roasters like Dr. G receive it, they can easily achieve the flavor profile that they want. Sometimes the method changes, like the natural method in the slide, and that same cherry is crushed or pulped rather through a machine that doesn't damage the green but splits the red skin around it and allows for the bean to start to dry. Now, the drying method is as important as the washing, as important as any other method. Certain varietals respond better to different methods. We won't go into the varietals because we'll be here until Sunday night. There must be, I'm talking 14, 15, 16 different varietals. Dr. G, please correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a lot of varietals out there. SL28, Katwai, the list goes on. I mean, Marigojat, Pagas, Pacamara, you name it, you got lots. But in this particular case, once we take the green bean, we dry it. We dry it onto what are known as African breads. And what we try to do is we try to bring down the humidity of the green bean so that we can transport it into Utah bags or green bags or Grain Pro bags. There's all kinds of different names for these bags. And maintain the flavor of the bean in the manner in which the farmer has been growing and harvesting the bean in such a way that no damage is caused to the bean by the time it reaches whatever market across the world. This is a very, very delicate transaction. And Mike, if you give me an extra couple of minutes, I do find that interesting, and I hope that our listeners find that interesting too, because the journey is interesting. The green bean that comes from the plant could be a mediocre bean. It could be a high-grade bean. For us to qualify this bean as specialty, the farmer needs to provide a sample of these beans in the best possible method of processing, prepare the green bean in the best possible method of transport, usually in small bags of 300 or 400 grams. And they send these beans out to Q graders across the world, individuals that will take the green bean, roast it to a very specific roast profile, which is globally recognized by a coffee association that is the global lord, so to speak, of the coffee industry. These graders will then roast the coffee. They will grind it at a certain micron. They will brew it in a certain manner with a certain pH and a certain hardness in the water at a certain temperature for a certain period of time, all calculated until such time that they start to cup, in other words, to taste. And when they taste this bean, they fill out a scoring card. And this scoring card will add up from the flavor to the smell to the density of the bean. How rich is it? How creamy is it? Does it have oils? The flavors? Is it complex? Is it citrusy? This scorecard will give out a score that we hope and that the farmers hope to be well above the 80-point score out of 100, which qualifies the bean to be a specialty coffee. So this is the grade that is used globally for us and individuals like Dr. G to be able to go to the consumer and say, you are drinking a specialty bean roasted in a certain manner and graded in a certain manner. Now, the subspecialties are by no means bad beans. They just don't carry the same value, particularly at the global auctions. And this is where some of the farmers start to get shortchanged, where they start to push for pricing. And you've worked all these years to produce a product that by 1 or 2 points doesn't quite qualify. And before you know it, your grade is probably worth 50, 60% less than it could achieve. So this doesn't really reach anything. It's just for the listeners out there and for the viewers to say, well, how do we try and taste better coffee? But how do we simultaneously try to protect the very community that wants to serve us great coffee? Because no farmer wants to serve or grow a bad product. So we try to take care. We try to take care in the way that we grade it. We try to take care in the way that we transport it. We try to take great care in the way that we roast it. And ultimately, we want the consumers out there to take this coffee and grind it in the right way and brew it in the right way so that they enjoy it in the right way. That's probably the biggest challenge. I mean, that's anybody's challenge. Us as consumers, we can pretty much destroy anything. You can give us a great ingredient and we can throw it in a hot pan and burn it and then blame the farmers, you know. So this is an interesting conversation that the doc and I have very often. Doc, actually, Mike, I hope you don't mind, but I wanted to touch on with the doc to discuss some of the processes of the methods of the coffee, which bring different flavors in the cup. You know, Doc, the honey method, for example, I think there's 3 or 4 different types of honey method.
Hey, Gerald, you're gonna have to turn on your audio up on the top.
You know, my audio keeps switching itself off.
No, you mustn't say that to the public. It sounds unprofessional.
Anyway, honey process is actually my favorite style of coffee. Of coffee processing. When I started as a roaster, it's one of the first things that I actually noticed, and the guys that I was learning from, it was all the rage. 2010, honey processing just came out of Costa Rica around 2008. So the Brazilians, the Africans have been doing it for quite a while. It ranges from white honey to yellow honey to red honey and black honey, and it's just a longer fermentation period, light or dark you go.
Sorry, Doc, sorry to interrupt you there 1 sec. Really, I apologize. I just wanted the listeners to understand how the honey process came about. And Mike, if you can just bear me 5 minutes, I know sometimes I get very boring and too technical, but a lot of the African countries, particularly, the traditional method of preparing and washing, the word washing coffee, was to wash the beans with an enormous amount of water, an incredibly expensive, lengthy exercise using tons and tons and tons of fresh water. And it had to be fresh water. So some of the countries started to allow their beans to ferment without the washing process, allowing them, and through these trials of saving all this water, we came into the honey processing method, which is today. Sorry, Doc, I just wanted to fill that in because sometimes we ask, why does it exist and why the hell do we call it honey process and why don't we carry on washing it if washing it was a traditional method of preparing high quality specialty coffee, you know? So my apologies for the interruption.
No need. You know, son, whenever you speak, it's always fantastic. I always learn so much about coffee. One of the aspects that I was referring to, the pulp natural, that's very popular in Brazil. Even the raised on African beds application in Africa, very similar. But Costa Rica is actually what gave the honey process its flamboyance from the name, and it actually stems from an earthquake that happened. There was a lot of water that was short around that time, and the name became very, very popular, and it evolved from there. And like I said, it is one of my very, very favorite styles of coffee to be roasting. It does meet the happy medium between the acidity of a washed processed coffee and the fruitiness and the almost mustiness that your naturals will deliver. So the screening process is a raised African bed. It's from Rwanda. It's a picture that stood out when I saw it for the first time. It reminded me of my time out there. What's happening over here is the sorting process post the washing and fermentation, and the coffee is hand sorted. And again, to get to that top end specialty coffee, so much care, so much time, and so many hands pass, or the coffee passes through so many hands just to get that top end, get the best. And one of the things that you can see in the back is coffee drying, and it's such a long, such an involved process. And yeah, we get it from a roasting perspective. We generally would spend anywhere between 15 to 20 minutes actually processing the coffee, depending on what we're roasting for, and pass it on to the barista, who generally will spend a minute to 2 minutes getting it to its optimum flavor profile. So the screening, the picture in the shot in screen is such a special picture because, like I said, it reminds me of Rwanda, and it also just signifies what coffee is to me. It's a relationship between people and a product. And for me as a roaster, the relationship between my roasting machine, the equation of energy that we have between manufacturing a product and the beauty of what we can achieve just from that whole process is absolutely unbelievable.
Doc, I wonder if I could just fill in there.
Yes.
You know, talking about honey process, sometimes some of our clients ask us, why is it called honey processed? So the first and most obvious aspect of the honey process is the fact that the beans are generally sweeter. And they're sweeter because the lack of the washing allows for the skin of the bean to remain on the bean during its drying process. So the bean absorbs all the sugars of that skin and makes the coffee so much sweeter. And I absolutely agree with Dr. G. It's one of my favorite coffees of all time. It's just when you get it right and the roasting is right and you extract it, there's no other bean that can give you that creaminess and that feel. It's just delicious. Now, the honey process, particularly in Costa Rica, they've developed a different stage of honey processing. So they've gone from a standard honey process to a yellow honey, red honey, and black honey. And you may find sometimes on a bag of coffee that says specialty coffee, that it will tell you the farm, the altitude, the type of coffee that it is, perhaps sometimes even the varietal, the SL28 or SL34, and then it will say black honey process. And how is this different from a red honey or a yellow honey? Is the way that it gets dried. So yellow honey processed is usually rotated more frequently, so it dries a little bit sooner, and it absorbs the sugars a little bit less because the humidity doesn't last as long. The red honey is rotated in a medium manner, and the black honey has a rotation on these beds which is minimal. Maybe once a day, they rotate the bean. So it gets very, very close to a fermentation stage, almost damaging the bean with too much absorption of water, and then they rotate it the next day. So this allows the bean to absorb more and more sugars off of the skin and slow down the drying process. So if you ever buy a little bag of specialty coffee, maybe look out if it has a honey processing and what kind of honey processing. Thanks, Doc.
Oh, you're welcome, Sandra.
Beautiful. Dr. G, do you want to maybe take us through a little bit through the art of roasting and the different degrees of roast that can be applied to the bean?
Okay, so the art of roasting really just stems from what, as a roaster, would like to achieve out of the coffee and pass on to my end user. We have just recently won an award for Costa Rica. It's roasted to a light medium end, but in the end cup, it delivers a lot of weight, a lot of sweetness, something that's almost synonymous with a dark medium type of roast profile. It's just because the coffee is just so fantastic, and that's why it delivers at such a light roast. Generally, with Africans, I tend to enjoy roasting them a little bit more towards the lighter end, or even the more medium end, because there's a lot of acidity in the coffee, and the coffee generally tends to have a lot of weight as well. When we're looking at an espresso application, we'd look more towards the Central and South Americans. Coffees are very, very hard in terms of their makeup, and they do respond a lot better to the darker style of roasting. Especially for espresso, we find that we're able to get a lot more sweetness and a balanced amount of acidity, a good amount of bitterness, which adds to the richness of the coffee and delivers a very, very delicious cappuccino or even espresso.
Dr. G, I'm happy you mentioned the word acidity there. I think for a lot of people, it has a negative connotation. Can you just maybe explain a bit about where it can be good and where, you can have too much?
Okay, so acidity generally gets perceived as bitterness because there's just so much of it. It stimulates the side of your palate, and people generally within the mainstream don't enjoy that. They do prefer a lot more bitter attributes or a lot more strength, which is another very interesting conversation. Generally, to keep the acidity alive, we try keeping the roasting process a little bit shorter, and we also manage the amount of heat going in, especially at the end of the roast. So for me, a basic roast profile will start with a lot of heat going in at the beginning of the roasting process, a little bit less heat, maybe about 40% less, and close to the end of the roast, that's where the development stage happens, where you develop all your flavors, and that's a very critical time. A lot more attention will be paid to the roaster or to the trier at that point in time, just to make sure we're hitting the right kind of color spectrum, we're hitting the right kind of aroma that's coming off the roast, and those are telltale signs of when we're starting to get ready to drop out that, and a little bit of history and experience with what we're doing, knowing what kind of time parameters we're looking at. And again, as technical as it sounds, for me, it's never an exact science. Some of my best roasts, some of the best batches that I've put together have always been mistakes. I remember roasting in roasting in London. It was the first time I actually used the small San Franciscan specialty roaster, and I was probably 40 degrees lighter than all of the other roasters that I was learning from. And Matt, he was the head roaster at the time, Q grade A, he held his license for a good 10 years. I think we have to discard that, but let's taste it anyway. We tasted it, and it was the style of roasting that the company I was working for at the time started to adapt for all of their Ethiopians, especially the wash ones.
That's amazing, Gerald. Just one other thing which I wanted to touch on as well is often when people ask that, they say they want a strong cup of coffee, and one of the things I think that people don't understand is that the more we roast a coffee, the less caffeine it has in it. So when someone asks for a strong cup of coffee, normally what they're asking for is a darkly roasted cup of coffee, because if they want something with a higher caffeine concentration, it would be on the lighter end of the roasting spectrum, correct?
Mike, that is correct to an extent. The amount of time that your water engages with your coffee will also dictate how much caffeine comes out of it. So if you consider a cold brew method versus an espresso, you'll get a lot more caffeine coming through your cold brew than you would with the espresso. Your filters will generally have a lot more caffeine in them and give you a little bit more of a buzz, because they're spending a lot more time with the water spending a lot more time with the coffee. From the espresso perspective, it seems a lot stronger and a lot more of a caffeine push, but I find that the espresso application is actually, it's got the least amount of caffeine. From a little bit of the studying that I've done, I found that the mixture of milk and water, milk being a very big alkaline, water and coffee being a very heavy acid, the body trying to break that down is actually what keeps you awake and picked.
Fascinating. I wanted to chat briefly, guys, about the biggest trend of the last, let's say, 15 years, which is single serve coffee. It's people were starting to enjoy exceptional coffee in cafes, in bars, and restaurants, and they wanted to replicate that sort of experience at home. But for a lot of people, to buy a super big, expensive coffee machine or espresso machine for their home, first of all, was beyond their reach in terms of affordability, but also they didn't have the technical skill to be able to actually pour the coffee. So that's where Nespresso came in, and they first developed the Nespresso system, which allowed people to buy a very cheap machine for their home and have the same coffee experience that they had in the cafe each morning or each evening when they were at home, and each drink was the same. So they had that consistency, and it's grown at an exceptional rate. Drip coffee is still the biggest in the States, but it's declined by 24% since 2015. And the global coffee market at the moment, in terms of coffee pods, is sitting at $25 billion US. So it's absolutely phenomenal growth, and it's on a very, very steep upward curve at the moment. Obviously, there is the side of it in terms of the environmental impact, where there are lots of plastic and aluminium pods, but there are moves towards fully compostable pods. It's one of the ones that we do at Medspresso, where our capsules are fully compostable, and people still want to have that cafe experience at home, and the pod market hasn't shown any signs of waning at all so far. And then if we move on to some of the health benefits of coffee, I know that first one is very dear to me. I know before I have my coffee in the morning, I'm not so happy, and after I have it, I feel fantastic. So it definitely makes you happier. It burns fat, improves a bit of physical performance, and there's been research recently to show that it can actually boost longevity, which is incredible. All these positive things which go, in addition to the beautiful taste and aroma and everything else that we associate with coffee. And then from M2 Bio and Medspresso point of view, people often ask, why do we mix CBD and caffeine? For a lot of people, it seems like, well, don't they cancel each other out? And what the CBD actually does when you mix it with coffee, it helps regulate the amount of caffeine and the rate at which the caffeine enters your body. I always like telling the story of my wife, who's also a massive coffee lover, but she couldn't have more than 2 cups of coffee per day. She always wanted to have the 3rd cup, but she'd get a bit jittery and a bit anxious and get that sort of like notch in your stomach. And towards the end of last year, she moved over to CBD coffee, and she's found that she can have the 3rd cup and a 4th cup if she wants in a day. She's sleeping better. She's a little bit less anxious, and they work beautifully together. It's actually a perfect marriage. If we just look at the future of coffee production, the coffee industry, and Alessandro, you alluded to it earlier, is under a lot of pressure at the moment in terms of, the farmers getting the correct amount. The global climate change is putting a lot of pressure on the Arabica production. And, in certain parts of the world, in Cote d'Ivoire and Sierra Leone, they've looked at other options outside of Arabica and Robusta in terms of other varietals that can be grown. It hasn't yielded much success yet, but people are trying to see, alternatives to make sure that we still get our cup of coffee every day. That's the end of the slide part of the presentation. I think would like to open it up now to any questions that people have put on the chat. And Jeff, if you want to step in and sort of ask a couple of questions to myself and Gerald and Alessandro.
I will. I have a few questions that I hope will inspire the audience a little bit. So first of all, it'd be great to have just a quick little 2-minute from, for instance, Gerald. I'd love to hear, because I have loved your story, Gerald. From the moment I met you here in Cape Town, I always told you I'm a huge supporter to have seen your journey to where you started and where you are today. And I can tell the audience that Rock and Roller is just an incredible facility for roasting. And you just know your stuff inside and out. And I don't even know you that well, but I'm so proud of you. I think it's amazing what you have done. So could you give us a quick little 2 minutes about you?
A quick 2 minutes about me. I come from the restaurant industry. I've been working within it for a very long time, and coffee's always been a part of that industry. When I started specializing in coffee, I already had a good understanding of taste and flavor, and I also had a good understanding of teaching and training people, and I was very fortunate to be able to empower my staff while teaching them about coffee. Working as a barista was just fantastic because I learned so much about business, I learned so much about people, and I just understood so much more that actually serves me right now, is that everything around coffee is a relationship, and the way you manage that relationship is pretty much what coffee is. And for me, with my staff, coffee is a relationship. We have coffee in the morning. That's where our relationship starts. We have a relationship with our equipment and a relationship with the coffee that we roast. So it works hand in hand. One of my best staff members is a technician, and I could see that he knew how to hold the tools 4 years ago when he started, and to see what he's grown into and managing his relationship with the customers, it's just fantastic. For me, the guy gets through 30 or 40 jobs in a week, and if I call him up on a Sunday after that, it's like, God, I can get it done, because a lot of what we do is, it's not driven by money, so to speak, but it's great to see that everybody is starting to earn a little bit more and grow themselves, grow their knowledge, but we're all driven by the passion to actually get our coffee right, get our equipment right, and continue doing what we do just based on our passion, based on our relationship. And the relationship around coffee transcends all the way back to couples. They'll generally meet for a coffee as opposed to meeting for drinks. It's a relationship. There's a strong aspect of it. A really good barista will have a good relationship with his equipment and the water that's going into his equipment, and where his grind setting is relative to his proportion, and that's a relationship on its own. And for me, the biggest and the best part of the coffee industry is just understanding and getting the relationships right and working on them, whether it's people to people through coffee, or whether it's people to equipment or people to the actual coffee. That for me is one of the driving forces that wakes me up every day and pushes me get that coffee and run that relationship.
What a beautiful story. Jesus, Gerald. I mean, you brought me to tears almost. I don't know where to go with that. I mean, that was unbelievable. Thank you so much. And Michael, over to you. Why don't you give us a quick little 2 minutes about you and how you grew up in this industry, well, in the last 20 years at least.
Sure. So like I alluded to in the beginning, I grew up with great coffee around me, got very into my filter coffee. I traveled a bit in the late 90s, and as the sort of the third wave coffee was starting to emerge, I started to enjoy the interesting flavors, the shift from the traditionally more dark roast to the sort of lighter, more interesting roast that I seem to enjoy. And I worked a bit in the States, and as the cafes were opening there, it was interesting to see the shift while I was there from, the traditional darker Italian style coffee to this, there wasn't a name for it yet. It was subsequently named third wave. That's the lighter, slightly lighter roast and more interesting flavor profile, a wider flavor profile. And over that just heightened my love for coffee. And in the last 5 years, I've been working pretty much nonstop in the coffee industry, in the capsule industry, and the whole bean industry. And I've just fallen more and more in love with coffee itself. I mean, my kids tease me because at home, I've got 7 different ways I can make coffee. I've got my regular espresso machine, my clip-up espresso, my capsule machine, my pour-over filter, my French press, my AeroPress, and my clever dripper. Was that 7? It might have been 8. I don't even know. I've lost count, actually. But they tease me because they're like, which way are you going to make it today? So yeah, I absolutely love it. And, I'm just fortunate enough to work in something that I'm so passionate about. And I think that's one of the connections that you and I had, Jeff. I mean, I can't rival your 15 shots. I mean, you start off with your 6 or 7 shot latte. You're already ahead from the first drink. I can't compete.
That's not good for you, Jeff.
Alessandro, over to you. Give us a 2-minute story about you. As I said earlier when we started off the webinar, I met Alessandro over a lunch, and it was amazing listening to his knowledge and passion for the industry. I mean, this man he eats, breathes, drinks coffee. He just knows so much about it. And it truly is fascinating to watch him. I remember when we had, at the end of the meal, I'll never forget this. You looked around, you said, espressos, everybody? I said, sure, I'm not going to say no. And so the coffee comes, and Alessandro takes his coffee, and he looks around at everybody and says, do you like it? And then he's looking for everybody's feedback. Do you like it? And I said, so you tell me, do you like it? He goes, no. And he goes, not only that, I can tell you whose coffee it is and why and this. And so, Alessandro, on that note, I mean, it was I loved hanging out with you. And if you could tell us a quick little 2-3 minutes about you.
I'll try and keep it short because coffee's pretty much been part of my life. I always like to boast that 44 years ago, I was in a cafe in Rome with my father, and he offered me my first latte macchiato, which means it's a stained glass of milk with a drop of coffee in it. Now, I don't know what the legal age of drinking coffee is, but for a 6-year-old to have a latte macchiato was quite a big thing. And then from there, I started to work with my father in his restaurant making coffees already at the age of 12 or 13. So I was making espresso and cappuccino. I was behind the machine. By that time, we were in South Africa. And then slowly but surely, we saw that with the restaurant and the coffee shop that we had, more and more people were taking onto this cappuccino, which, if I tell you guys, back in 1987, we'd opened a restaurant. We'd been running for a year. We used to give cappuccinos away for free on Saturday mornings in the shopping mall, so that we could get people to order it and taste it. It's not that long ago. And clients would ask us for filter coffee with fresh cream, and we would say, please have a free cappuccino on us. So that's how far back it went. And then from there, we needed coffee machines, and nobody would fix coffee machines. And eventually, I finished school at 18, and that same year, literally by January of the following year, I went to do my technician training. And I did training for servicing and restoring and reparations of coffee machines. And then we bought a few machines for ourselves, and we bought a few espresso machines for our friends. And then from there, we decided that we were going to bring a few other machines for other people that wanted it. And since then, the restaurant's closed, and I stopped being behind the espresso machine, which I used to enjoy. I used to love making the coffee, and I'm sure Doc agrees with me. There's just something about being behind the machine making coffee for people that is just fantastic. And
you feel like Superman.
Sorry?
You feel like Superman.
When you get it right, you do. When you get it wrong. But yeah. With a bunch of experience, you get it right more than you get it wrong. And you do feel like Superman. It's fantastic. And you make a lot of people happy, like Mike. He gets happy after he has coffee. And then from there, I've always loved the technicality of the espresso machine. I've always loved it, understanding solenoid valves and pressure and temperature. And then I started to realize how all of that only really affected the flavor in the cup. So now we started to understand what was the water and the pressure and the temperature doing to the coffee. Why was it so important to tamp the coffee, to distribute the coffee? Why were the blades in the grinder so important to give you the right kind of microns, the right kind of fine-tuned beans and ground that was slow down the flow of water going through a puck? Was it 14 grams, 12 grams, 16 grams? How it would react? What was the flow of the water? And before you know it, you engage in this map of knowledge and you realize how little you know. And you start to dig more and more and more, thinking that eventually you'll get the answers, although the question continuously changes. And I found myself going on to 50, I'm not 50 yet, but going on to 50, having spent the last 32 years trying to create that one pager that is coffee, and it's impossible. You'll find gradients and microns, and you'll find beans and honey processors, and the variables of recipes that are endless. You'll find one consumer with one coffee, with one grinder, with one setting, with one kettle, and he'll drink a different coffee every day, and somebody somewhere along the line will not be able to explain it. And that for me is fascinating. It's just, and that drove me to getting diplomas and going qualifying Q grader courses and doing World Barista Championship head judging, hoping and of course achieving some stuff along the way. But you always think you get closer and closer, but you just gain more knowledge and you just apply it to that same platform. And I still feel ignorant after all these years. So
yeah, I mean, Alessandro, I saw the machines you and Gerald have at the shop there. I mean, Mike was sharing what the prices are in these machines. I mean, it's like the price of a car. And yes, some of these, you're a collector of fine espresso machines, historical espresso machines, which I think is so cool. I mean, I've seen some of those things and I'm like, oh my word, look at this machine. And I understand why you look at it much like Mike might look at a Formula One car from the 1950s and go, oh my God, look at the mechanics on that. And for you, it's the same thing when you look at the coffee machine. And you guys, and I forget the name of the brand that you carry. It starts with a D, I think.
So we do Vittorio Arduino and Nuova Simonelli, but Vittorio Arduino is the father of coffee. That's where all the patents from the 1800s came from. Yeah.
I mean, the prices on those machines, well, actually, maybe could you just give an example of what a price might be on an espresso machine? You know, it's one of those kind of bigger ones. What would that bigger black one cost, Gerald, approximately? Just as an example.
The big black one with the customized boiler, you probably look anywhere between 126 to maybe 140,000 Rand.
That's a big ticket. Right?
It sounds like a lot in rands, Jeff, but if you convert it to euros, it's not so bad. It's just that we talk hundreds of thousands every time we talk about anything that's imported.
If you also consider that running that application can not just get your return on investment, but it can really just drive business and cause you to open 3 or 4 more stores. So the cost may sound expensive, but what it can do for you is it's even more mind-boggling.
Amazing. So we're going to we have maybe about 10 or 12 minutes left. I want to do a little bit of quick firing, like rapid questions. So let's try and keep the answers to about a minute only. Gerald, what is the most expensive bean, generally speaking, every year? Give me your top 1 or 2, and why is it the most expensive?
Generally, I've found that the most expensive coffees have been either your natural processed Ethiopians or your natural processed Costa Ricans. There are a couple of Guatemalans that have been floating around. They generally tend to have a lot of unique attributes, like very distinctive pineapples that would come through. Kenya, on the other hand, has consistently been an expensive coffee to bring in, and it's consistently been a fantastic coffee to bring in. Year on year, the cherry tomatoes and soup-like attributes that come through that coffee, it's phenomenal how consistent they are.
And at a retail level, Gerald, if you were to buy a 250 pack on the shelf, what would that most expensive bean sell for in Rand, compared to like the lowest that I've seen, maybe 39 Rand or whatever for a thing at Pick and Pay? So you go from 39 Rand for a real junky coffee to what? What could that amount to?
You can look at anywhere between 200 to even 300 Rand, depending on the quality of the coffee and the cost of the green coffee, because everything's calculated, at least from mine, in proportion to that.
Cool. And every year, generally speaking, again, most expensive doesn't necessarily mean best bean either. So what are the best beans? This will go to Alessandro. Every year, what are the best beans generally as rated by people like you that actually give these beans a rating?
The first thing that we look at is the source. It's very important to understand that it doesn't come by fly-by-night trying to create something through a marketing channel, but rather through a history of farmers that have really perfected some type of growing or harvest or fermentation style. And with this, we try to look at what we refer to as the micro lots. A micro lot is a very specific bean grown in a very specific manner from a very specific plant looked after in a certain way. And the micro lot is usually small, sometimes 5 bags, sometimes 10 bags, no more than that. You're talking maybe $500 a pound. You could be spending a lot of money on one bag of coffee. And those are the ones we look at. Again, the processing varies, yeah?
And have you tried a $500 per pound coffee?
Not a $500 per pound. I don't think I would ever be able to spend that kind of money. Being in the industry that we're in, we would probably invest that money in other things. You know, if you buy a 2,000 Rand a kilo coffee, you're probably getting a specialty grade somewhere above the 93, 94 points out of 100. And that is absolutely, that is the epitome of coffee, and it is more than enough to experience the greatness. The rest, when you start reaching $500 a pound, there must be an enormous amount of marketing around it. And I don't think that value is in the bean. Right. And I'd rather go to the micro lot farmer that has taken the care to do it, and I'll give him 2,000-3,000 Rand for each kilo of coffee with the greatest of pleasure.
Very cool. I remember going way back, many, many decades. My favorite coffee I've ever had in my life and the best experience ever was a Blue Mountain coffee when I was in Jamaica. As kids, we were there frequently, and I remember sitting by the pool once with my brother, and I'd never tried Blue Mountain coffee, and I tried this, and I'm like, oh my God, this is better than tiramisu. I mean, that is how good it didn't need sugar, it didn't need milk, it didn't need anything. It was just on its own, just such an incredible beverage. And I'll never forget that. I've tried other Blue Mountains. There are a lot of fake Blue Mountains on the market, unfortunately.
Yes, too many.
But I have had some of the authentic ones since, and they truly are delicious. So thank you for that answer. Mike, what is in terms of like taking care of the farmers that are out there, now that we've talked about price range, what is it? Price range could be 39 Rand and, 400 Rand, 500 Rand for the bag. What about the farmers out there? How are they being taken care of properly for the work that they do?
So unfortunately, the short answer to that, in most cases, they're not being taken care of. It's something that Gerald and I chatted about the other night. There's some guys who are doing the right thing in terms of transparency and showing, the farmers and how much they're paying the farmers. And that's nice to see sometimes. So you can see how much the farmer is actually getting. But I mean, Gerald, we chatted about his time in Rwanda, and unfortunately, a lot of the cases there is that the farmers are exploited to a certain degree. Not all of them. A lot of people are doing the right thing, but they don't know how much it's worth sort of in a commercial point of view. And Alessandro touched on that in terms of the marketing that's put into it. But you get companies like Fairtrade and Rainforest Alliance who try to take care and give a little bit back to the farmers. But I think it's a constant struggle because the bigger companies are chasing to push the price down at the farm level so they can build in more margin later on in the process.
Cool. So, I mean, one solution that we are bringing to market, of course, is the blockchain to be able to go all the way from, being in the ground all the way to your cup. And that is a big, big problem that we hope to solve along with other products that we're involved in, like olive oil and honey and products like that, where the amount of forgery that's in the marketplace is not only scary, it's dangerous. So we hope to address that issue using blockchain technology. It's a perfect solution in our mind. Gerald, maybe you could just give us a quick little, we've got about 4 or 5 minutes to go. How do we get that cream on the beautiful espresso, and what does that mean? So we spoke earlier about a Robusta and Arabica bean. What is it that makes that special cream that we all love to see on top of the espresso?
Okay, so the cream is an emulsification of oil and water that, depending on where you grind it and your proportion and also the freshness of your coffee, those aspects have a direct impact on the amount of crema that you'll get. If you're looking at a more lighter roast, you'll generally find that there's a little bit of crema and it's not as rich as a darker roast, whether it's Robusta or whether it's even Arabicas, where your grind setting's at. And the portion of coffee that you have and the freshness of the coffee, those will all dictate how much crema you get. Generally, it's better to grind your coffee fresh.
Amazing.
Oh,
and Gerald, so I guess we're pretty much all the same, and we spoke about, touched on it earlier. I think that we all like to have different kinds of coffees every day. I mean, I know that I change mine up almost every 3-4 days because I'll get bored of a particular bean and I'll want to try something different. I'll want to try a different method. And I like to try different kinds of beans to see if I can find the holy grail. And I think I'm a little bit like Alessandro. I'm trying to find the perfect cup. And does it exist? I don't know, but I'm gonna keep on trying to find it. And when I make my French press in the morning, or I use the Nespresso machine, or in this case, the Medspresso machine, or all the different. I still love the old on the stove method with the Italian pour. I love that thing, and there's so many different ways to do it. So between all three of us here, I guess it's like wine for people that enjoy wine. If you were going to drink the exact same wine every night, you'd probably get bored of it. So what suggestions could you offer, all three of you, in just 1 minute, to all of our audience here, like how to get a bit more creative with coffee? Don't just think of it as, taking freeze-dried coffee and putting 100 scoops of sugar in it, because that's not coffee. So maybe we could give 1 minute to everybody. And what do you think people should explore going forward?
Personally, the easiest way to go exploring is the amount of coffee you're using relative to the amount of water. That would be a good starting point for me. And the next starting point for me would be if you have if you're buying from a facility like us where we're pre-grinding by different size grind microns and run your experiment at that level. Easy way to get a good understanding of what the coffee is about across very many different spectrums.
Very cool. I like that. Michael, what do you say?
I would say is try the same coffee in a few different ways, because that's always surprising for me. If you at a particular cafe, your favorite place where you like to drink it, if they pour it as an espresso for you there, take the same bean home and have it as a filter coffee, have it as a plunger, and you can see how different the same bean tastes. And you can see that maybe the way that you've been drinking, maybe a cappuccino or flat white, maybe on the odd occasion, every fifth drink, you order it as a filter coffee just to mix up the flavor a little bit. That would be my suggestion.
Cool. Alessandro.
I was going to go along the lines of what Mike said, because you'll find that one same bean will give you so many different pleasant results. But to mention something a little bit different, I would try to use a similar type roast profile, because coffee appreciation in the palate is very much perception and recognition in the brain too. If you go from a very dark roast to a very light roast, you're going to hate it. So find a coffee that is semi-suitable or close to what you're used to. For example, you can have a very light citrusy type floral coffee done in a pour over as your 4 o'clock coffee instead of a cup of tea, because it's soft, it's mild, it's delicious. And then you take your slightly darker roast, and like Mike suggests, maybe you do a French press in the morning or a mocha pot, which burns it just a little bit more. It's phenomenal. And don't veer too much off what your expectation of your cup of coffee is. So always think through a little bit of the roast profile of the coffees you're going for sure.
Cool. And we've got 2 more minutes, 2 last questions. Number 1, has there ever been a coffee rated a 100 score?
Not that I know of.
Cool. And our Peaberry that we use at Medspresso, in terms of how does that rate every year?
Rate in terms of score?
In terms of score, likability, etc.
I believe those are all specialty grade, and every harvest will have a different grading.
Cool. So, well, actually, I mean, I happen to know the scores. They are extremely high. I think, Michael, you know the scores as well. And of course, it is our product. Michael, what are we at? Like a 88, 89 or whatever?
Yeah, 88.2, I think, was the harvest that we used for most recent production.
Okay, just so you know, we don't actually get above 90s on the South African market. We have to import them especially. So to be using 88s, 89s, that's the highest specialty grade available. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and it's
Dr. G.
Yeah, and it's actually, I mean, Dr. G and his incredible roasting, but it was one of the coffees that when we first decided to do coffee here in Africa, I spent so much time researching and tasting, and I am still blown away. I told Mike this morning, I get excited at 3 a.m. this morning to get in here and make my French to have that thing. And it is just, the flavor of it is incredible. So that's amazing. Last question is an interesting one. Has anybody here in the panel heard of the next form of coffee, which is lab-grown coffee?
I've heard of it. Never tasted it. I don't know if it's ever going to get out there on the market where it's going to be big enough to be able to commercialize it. I'm not sure.
That's what they said about Beyond Meat as well, with a $25 billion market cap. So you never know. I mean, everybody seems to be doing some kind of lab-grown something nowadays. I just came back from the longevity conference in the UK a week ago, and to see what they're doing with regeneration of body parts is unbelievable. I mean, we're talking about being able to put arms or legs from worms into different positions on the worm, moving the head to the side of the body, being able to simply move the eyeballs to the side of the body, adding eyeballs. You want to make the worm with 10 eyeballs, you give him 10 eyeballs. He can see through all 10. So where we're slowly heading with biology and technology and lab-grown coffee, who knows? I mean, they're making, it seems, alternatives to everything nowadays to save the world. But for now, I think I will be set on having my beautiful coffee roasted by Gerald, found by Michael, and by you, Alessandro. I'm going to be a happy camper with that every morning. I don't think I need my lab-grown coffee at the moment. And on that note, I want to thank all 3 of you, Alessandro, for your time, your effort, and your knowledge. Your knowledge of the industry is just incredible. Gerald, thank you so much for being an inspiration to so many young baristas around Africa. You've done amazing work, and to see you translate that into your own business now with Alessandro is really deeply inspiring for me. And I hope that translates into many, many others around that see the opportunity they could pull it off as well. And Michael, of course, for being the CEO of MJ MedTech and M2 Biofood and the coffee and everything that we're doing. You're doing an amazing job. I love working with you. I love your attitude, your get up and go, and always cheerful. The guy's got a 24/7 smile. I mean, I think he's got intravenous. He's got coffee being
a little coffee bag.
Yes, it's being pumped into him. So I want to thank all three of you for this, and thank you, Luca. You can't see him, but Luca, as always, for setting up the webinar, doing a great job behind the scenes. And I look forward to our next one. By the way, this will be recorded. It will be available for all to watch in the coming couple days. And I want to thank you again. It was amazing, and I look forward to doing another one soon, very soon. If I don't see you guys, I will see you, Michael. But, you know, all the very best for the upcoming holiday season, and let's have an amazing 2022.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Thanks, Alessandro. Thanks, Dr. G.
Cheers.